We support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
David Seymour.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the ACT Party in opposition to this bill. I notice the third David to speak in this debate tonight, and I'd like to share my condolences with my fellow David Parker, whose heart really isn't in it. You can tell that he is about as passionate about this bill as a very passionless person about a very dispassionate thing. Mr. Speaker, we've heard some very interesting arguments about why the government should own Kiwibank at all. Because if you want to be a supporter of this bill, then you have to first and foremost believe that the government of New Zealand is somehow advancing the interests of New Zealanders by owning Kiwibank. And it's worth just thinking about how that might be. What we heard from Mr. Parker is that the ownership of Kiwibank by the government somehow makes the rest of the banking sector more competitive and somehow ensures that we get either better service, lower mortgage rates, lower fees, or some combination of the above from the remainder of the banking sector. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are many sectors which might be described as oligopolistic in the economy. For example, jumbo jets. There are only 2 serious providers of those in the world, but nobody is seriously suggesting the New Zealand government should own a jumbo jet manufacturer just to ensure that New Zealanders get decent service from the jumbo jet industry. And indeed, we could go through quite a range of different industries where the argument that David Parker made could be applied, but of course we wouldn't, because it is absurd. And it is equally absurd in the case of the banking sector. But even if we look past the absurdity of the notion applied to other sectors, we just have to ask ourselves, how is it that Kiwibank could offer a better level of service to New Zealand consumers than other banks? And there appear to be really only 2 ways. One is that it is going to be somehow smarter, more innovative and more efficient than the other 4 major banks. And let's not forget some of our smaller domestic competitors here in New Zealand as well, and all of the non-banking entities in the financial services sector, that somehow Kiwibank has knowledge and information that none of them have that it can bring to bear to operating more efficiently than they can. Well, Mr. Speaker, if the government could set up entities that were that ingenious, then I think they should be doing it in quite a wide range of sectors, but of course the government does not have that sort of insight. The other way, and the more likely way, is that in investing in Kiwibank on behalf of the taxpayer, the government is prepared to accept a lower return than those taxpayers could get if they were to invest elsewhere. For instance, somebody who might have some of their portfolio invested in a trading bank. So the government would be taking money off New Zealanders they could be investing elsewhere and forcing them to invest it in Kiwibank at a lower rate return. That is the Green Party's proposal, to effectively subsidise mortgages by shoveling cheap capital into the back of one bank. Mr. Speaker, it's a clever trick politically, but it doesn't actually make anybody better off in the long run and on average. Mr. Speaker, there's a range of technical problems with this bill that Andrew Bailey brought up, I thought, quite loudly and eloquently. What changes in capital structure are permissible under Kiwibank? And this is the reason why government ownership tends to be less efficient, because there are these additional political constraints, such as what can be the capital structure of ownership for an entity such as Kiwibank. All sorts of questions start to arise as they try to change their ratio of debt and equity funding. They just don't have the level of autonomy that a privately owned entity would have. But, Mr. Speaker, I just want to finally touch on a couple of comments that Julianne Genter made, and in particular the xenophobic nature of them, because the thread running through her speech was this implicit assumption that if foreigners are involved, if foreigners buy the bank, then somehow that is more sinister than if New Zealanders owned the bank. And I think it's regrettable that the House has come to that standard of debate all too often these days, Mr. Speaker, on issues that should be a question of economic vote debate rather than parading our xenophobia. So, Mr Speaker, with those thoughts, I resume my seat in opposition to this bill. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Alistair Scott.